Hello everyone, welcome into the podcast. On today's podcast, I'm going to be delving into what it means to embrace your role as a taken in hand. But before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe, do all the things, let us know what you think in the comments. All of that really does help out the channel, and if you want to support the channel even further, links on how to do that is in the description box. We have membership options here on YouTube as well as Patreon, so definitely check it out. So last week you probably heard Coda go into what it means to embrace your role as a head of household, what that can look like, and give his perspective on that. So this week I am doing the same thing on the taken in hand side. So before I really get too far into it, I want to make something like super clear. Every relationship is going to look different. There is no one right way or one size fits all that's going to fit every relationship. You have to decide how these dynamics are going to play out in your relationship, what you're comfortable with, what your head of household is comfortable with, and how you're going to navigate that pattern of growth and expectations together. So there's different levels of authority transfer, right? So if you are in a domestic discipline relationship, that inherently means that the head of household is going to hold more authority than the taken in hand. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to hold all of the authority. Even if that is something that is well represented, even if that is something that is very common, it doesn't have to be that way. You can individualize that for your relationship. So I have seen couples where they take the approach that the head of household holds all of the authority and holds all of the decision-making power, and the taken in hand comes under that completely and fully and embraces the role of not holding any authority in that dynamic. That's very valid. But I've also seen where couples will have it to where the taken in hand still holds some authority and some autonomy. They have figured out a way to balance the taken in hand retaining some of her authority in the relationship and in the dynamic in a way that still honors the head of household having the final decision, having the final say. And so you just have to figure out what is going to work for your relationship and what needs to happen to get to the goals that you want and to facilitate the growth that you want. I feel like Coda and I have definitely done this at different stages, right? When we started out, we did not have this perspective of a total authority transfer. We did not have this perspective that he was going to have the complete authority of our relationship, and over time we've grown into that, but that's definitely not where we started. So we have kind of some perspective of how to navigate different stages. And again, some couples will want to facilitate that growth very, very quickly, and some couples take small measured growth over time and find that to be more sustainable. So you just have to figure out the path that's going to work for you and where you settle on that path, because even though I can say that for Coda and I it is 100% the right decision that we have come to a place where he has complete authority in our relationship, he has the decision-making power, and he has the ability to make the decisions, make the determinations, to lead our relationship in the way that he sees appropriate, and I will follow that. I will submit to that authority. Even though that's where we landed, I can recognize that's not where everyone is going to land. And so it's okay if you hear that and you're like, yeah, that's not for me. That's not what I want. And maybe you hear that and you're like, I don't want to give all of the authority over to my head of household. I don't want to lose my autonomy. I don't want to lose myself, right? Because I think sometimes we think of when we hand those things over, that we lose ourselves. And that might be true for some. I haven't necessarily experienced that. I found that I actually found freedom in giving that authority over. But that's not going to be everyone's experience. And so if you hear that and you're like, that's not for me, don't think that you can't have a DD relationship just because that's not what you want, right? You can still have domestic discipline in your relationship. You just have to find a balance. Now, until you find that balance, it might feel like a power struggle. It might feel really difficult, and you might question yourself and your partner along the way. You might not really understand if, you might really doubt if domestic discipline is going to work for you. But just keep at it, because again, it's just something that you have to find where you fit, right? You have to find where those puzzle pieces fit together and how it's going to work to your, like, the betterment of your whole relationship. And you can have domestic discipline still. You just have to find where you want those lines to be drawn. So now, having said all that, let's get into how do you embrace being taken in hand. I think the first thing that you do need to recognize, and it kind of goes into what I was just saying, is you really do need to recognize that you are under the authority of your head of household. In order for domestic discipline to exist, there has to be accountability and there has to be authority. And again, where those lines are drawn are completely up to you. But you have to recognize that you are under the authority and being held accountable by your head of household. And even though that can feel very scary, that can feel like a huge shift in how your relationship functions, it really is a good thing. And to understand that there are boundaries and perimeters that you are being held accountable to, that can bring a lot of security, that can bring a lot of predictability, that can bring a lot of understanding of who you are and who your head of household is. And so it's not a bad thing to be under authority, but that's the first thing that you have to really kind of wrap your head around, is that you are under the authority of someone else and you have chosen that. And you really do need to make the choice and to embrace being taken in hand. You really have to decide that this is what you want. Decide that this is something that is going to benefit your relationship, and then understand that you're under that authority and act accordingly. To embrace being taken in hand, you really do need to understand who your head of household is. I think that when we first started, I was making so many insinuations and assumptions over what domestic discipline was going to look like, what I expected, what I wanted, how I saw our relationship, how I saw domestic discipline working in our relationship. And it was all very focused on me and my perspective and what I wanted. I wasn't really looking at who my head of household was. I wasn't really looking at what my head of household wanted from this, what their priorities were. And that me-focused perspective was so detrimental, not only to my growth, but to the growth of our relationship and how domestic discipline was able to benefit our relationship, and more often than not, how domestic discipline wasn't benefiting our relationship because I wasn't really embracing focusing on my head of household and how they were leading the relationship. And so you really need to embrace and learn about who your head of household is. You really need to learn who your head of household is, what their priorities are, what their leadership style is, how they want to lead, how they want to accomplish the goals, how they want to communicate. You really do need to learn your head of household, because there are different leadership styles. There are different ways that a head of household will conduct the relationship, and you need to again, we talked about comparison in a past podcast. You need to really just refrain from comparing your head of household to whatever ideal that you've created in your head, whether that's someone that you have read about online or some image that you've created of your own making. You need to really refrain from comparing your head of household to this ideal standard that you think that they should be doing, and really learn how do they want to lead, and then come under that leadership, come under that authority in a way that honors who they are. Also, I just kind of said this a little bit in passing in that last statement, but you need to be less focused on yourself. I think that so many times we are told that we need to, make sure that we're taken care of, make sure that our needs are being met, that our voice is being heard, that, our perspectives are being honored in our relationships, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. I think that most head of households, they really do want to take care of their taken in hands. They really do want to hear us, and they want to make sure that we are on the same page as them, that we have the same goals, that we, are working towards the same things with intention. But we need to really focus more on coming under the leadership of our head of household, focus more on honoring their decisions, and focus more on understanding that our head of household really is the one who is driving this relationship. They are the ones who are making the decisions, and we need to step back and let them do that on their own, and then just come back in as a support to say, yes, I agree with you. Yes, I will do that. Yes, I will follow your lead. Yes, I will come under your authority. Instead of, and I am so guilty of this, I've done this many, many times where I say, you have the authority, you have the final decision, but this is what I really think you should do. Or you have the authority, you have the decision, but this is what I want. Or this is how I feel, or this is a goal that I have, or this is, so many times I have tried to give Coda that authority, but almost in a manipulative way where he felt compelled to do what I was asking or what I was wanting, because I was inserting myself into that process when I should have been stepping back, and I should have been giving him space to lead in a way that honored who he is and the leadership style that he has and how he wants to run our home and our relationship. And so really taking the focus off of ourselves and really putting the focus on what does our head of household want? What authority do they hold, and how does that authority branch out into the rest of our dynamic, our life, our lifestyle, our home, our relationship? How does their authority reach into all those areas? And let me honor that. That's not to say that you can't communicate to your head of household. Don't get that wrong. I'm not saying to completely lose your voice or to not express what you want or need from your relationship. And I'm not even saying that you should refrain from sharing your experiences and your feelings with your head of household. But there is a time and place. And there's a way to do that, and you need to be respectful. You need to make sure that you are communicating those things in a way that, again, honors how they are running your relationship and honors when and how much information they want in that regard. So again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to become voiceless, but just become less self-focused. Another way to really embrace being taken in hand is to understand that your head of household has priorities for what they want from you. And what I mean by that is, I think that I went into domestic discipline with the expectation that respect was going to be the gold standard, the number one priority. And that's actually not the case for Coda. It is for so many head of households. Like, so many head of households feel like respect is their number one thing that they need from their taken in hand. But I think because I have, to an extent, not always perfectly, and I've definitely developed this over time, but respect is not something that I have struggled with a lot. Of course, I struggled with it because until you start to be under authority, you really don't know how to respect authority until you have that accountability. So of course I struggled with it, but respect was something that came a little more naturally to me than what Coda's actual priority for me is, which is obedience. I asked him the other day because I was like, what is the priority for me? Like, what do you need from me the most? And he said, I need your obedience. And that really struck a chord with me because, number one, I didn't really realize how much I struggled with being obedient. And number two, that just wasn't the answer that I expected. I expected him to prioritize being respected more than my obedience. Of course, they're all interlinked, right? You know, you can't disobey someone and respect them at the same time, and you can't, and when you're obeying them, it is a sign of respect, so it is kind of interlinked, but for him, the priority is obedience over respect. And so you really want to look at what is my head of household's priority for me, and you really want to focus on developing that quality. Also, you need to understand that to be a good taken in hand, to develop yourself as a taken in hand, you need to understand the personal responsibility that you have. You cannot require your head of household to put you in your place. You just can't. They offer accountability, they offer boundaries, they offer parameters, they set rules, all of those things. But at the end of the day, you have a responsibility to adhere to those structures. You have a responsibility to come under that authority. You have a responsibility to really try your best and to make efforts towards growth for yourself and within your role. I've talked about before, and I can't remember if I've talked about it here on YouTube or if I've talked about it in my Patreon only content, but I've talked about before how if we as taken in hands require our head of household to constantly be punishing us and constantly be putting up those boundaries and constantly be reprimanding us and having to really micromanage us and give us like so much oversight, that causes them a lot of effort and a lot of stress. And it can be very easy for a head of household who is under that, within that dynamic, to want to give up. Like, no one wants to do something that is hard all the time. And the point of domestic discipline is not to make the relationship hard on either person. You should, now that's not to say that growth is easy. Obviously growth takes effort and you're going to have periods of your relationship where it feels harder than others, but the overall goal of domestic discipline is to bring you closer together, to facilitate connection, and to make your relationship feel easier on both people. And the way you can make your relationship feel easier to your head of household is to take personal responsibility, to develop yourself as a taken in hand, to put in the effort to follow the structures and systems that they've put into place, and to develop your ability to come under their authority, to respect them, to obey them, to, honor them, to do all the things that they require of you, that they want from you, that drive the relationship further towards your goals. You have a responsibility to work towards that for yourself and for your head of household. The next thing I want to say is that part of being taken in hand is realizing that our head of household isn't always going to be perfect. they're not going to show up perfectly all the time. They're not going to be the perfect leader. They're not going to have perfect authority. They're not going to make perfect decisions. And we have to give them room to make those mistakes, and we have to forgive them. I know that when I make a mistake, obviously there's consequences. We've built in those structures. There's punishments. Part of the punishment process that is so valuable is the part where Coda forgives me. He forgives me for what I did, because I would say a lot of our rules, if not most of our rules, are rules because when I don't uphold my responsibilities, it causes dissension in our relationship. It causes systems to break down. It just causes things to go awry. And so part of that punishment process is Coda forgiving me for what I did so that we can move forward without that dissension in our relationship, with a restored sense of connection. And so when Coda messes up, it makes no sense for me to take that as an opportunity to hold it against him. He forgives me so often, and he forgives me fully, because even though he punishes me, even though he gives me those consequences, he still has to make the decision to forgive me and to not hold that against me. That's an emotional process in him. That's not something that happens just because I was punished. That's something that happens because he decides for it to happen. And so on the flip side, I need to decide to forgive him and not hold his mistakes against him, because they are going to happen. He's not always going to be perfect. And it's okay for him to acknowledge that he made a mistake, apologize for it, and for me to give him the same forgiveness that he offers to me time and time again. So just understand that part of your role as a taken in hand, part of your development as a taken in hand, is to offer your head of household forgiveness, not to hold things against them, and to move forward in the relationship in a way that still honors their authority, even when it's imperfect. Lastly, I just want to encourage you that if you are on your journey of being a taken in hand, whether you have been in this relationship structure for a long time or a short while, one of the best things that you can do to deepen your sense of your role and to understand your responsibilities of being taken in hand is to be in community with other taken in hands. It is so important as a taken in hand to be able to connect and talk to other taken in hands, to be able to talk through some of these challenges. It can be a challenge, especially for women that have been very solidified in their roles in their marriages before domestic discipline, to make changes and to make shifts and to understand how their relationship is changing and how they're changing. And coming under authority is something that can be very challenging. It's something that can be kind of natural for some, but more often than not, it can be very challenging to embrace this role of being under authority. And it is so important to be able to talk through those challenges with other women who get it. And it's not all about rules and obedience and structures and punishments. It's not always about that. Sometimes conversations do need to center around how we conceptualize those concepts. But it's also every aspect of our lives. Like, I'm having a parenting challenge that I don't know how to navigate this now that I'm taken in hand at. Like, my husband has full authority in our home, so now that we're facing this parenting challenge, how do I honor his authority while still having this challenge with my child? Or how do I forgive him. I'm having a really hard time forgiving him for something he said or something he did, you know, or it's the first time that my head of household has really made a mistake and it's throwing me completely off because I don't know how to handle the feelings that I'm having right now. All of those things are things that you need to be able to talk through with other take-it-in-hands who completely understand the emotional process of having a head of household, of being under authority, and being disciplined. And so those are all things that you really do need to find community. And again, I don't want to ever push someone into joining our Patreon, but the Discord server that we have as one of our Patreon benefits, it really is a wonderful community of, we have a community of taken-in-hand women who are in relationships, who are navigating their role as being a taken-in-hand in their current relationship. And it's something that is just a wonderful place to build that connection. I'm sure that other communities out there exist, but it's just something that I would encourage you to seek out. Because again, it's just not something that you can really talk through with someone unless they understand what that entails and what that means. So, all right, guys, I think I have kind of exhausted my perspectives on this. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope that it gave you something to think about, something that you can apply. Let me know down below, how have you, if you are taken in hand, how have you embraced and developed your role in your relationship, and what are some challenges that you're having? I'd love to hear it. So anyway, we will talk to you guys next week.